I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to the Thursday edition of Conversations with Al McFarlane. Today is Thursday, June 2nd, 2022. And Thursday, I talk with sisters and brothers, men and women that I call my companions, and we have kind of an unstructured, open conversation. We ask each of us to bring to the table whatever's on our mind, what's pressing us at the moment, what we're excited about, sad about, angry about, what we want to tell the world about. I'm glad to continue in that vein and welcome my friends and colleagues, Kamau J. King, he's in Atlanta, Jonathan Palmer is here in St. Paul, and Dr. Irma McFarlane is joining us from the East Coast, from North Carolina. Hello to all, and thank you all for being here. Let me start with you, Jonathan. Just what's on your mind, and what should we talk about today? What do you want to share with us, and invite our listeners and viewers to jump in the conversation as well?
Thank you, Al. Really glad to be here. And top of mind for me is we're just past the 101st anniversary of the Tulsa Race Massacre, and looking back at that in history and the impact that had, it being such a major historical event. And yet, if it hadn't been for Watchmen, a TV series, most Americans wouldn't even know about it. The 2019 that came out and opened in Tulsa, and the internet blew up, and people suddenly realized there had been this big thing that happened, and they didn't know about it. And so I'm thinking back on the impact of that and the violence that was inherent, that the impact it had on the Black community. And I'm reflecting on that with Uvalde and what's happened there, and the fact that we're not getting any clear answers, that the police chief there is hiding and avoiding any kind of culpability because of quote unquote respect for the parents, which it is a non-starter in my mind. If you had respect, you'd go ahead and tell them why it took 40 to 50 minutes and why it was 80 minutes before you stopped the shooter. So I'm looking at the juxtaposition between two significant historical events that both have elements of things that shouldn't have happened but yet did, and that broader debate around the misconception of what the Second Amendment stands for. The idea that it's about arming people or people having rights to have guns, when actually it was about going ahead and making sure that you could draw up a militia to quell a slave rebellion. And
you mentioned Watchmen as a tool for getting people aware. Actually, frankly, I don't know what that is. So take a minute and tell me what that was about. And I knew about Tulsa, and I've known about it for a long time, but that wasn't one of the sources. So I'm interested in you describing how that particular platform was one of the venues to bring it into wider consciousness. That's number one. And I'm also interested in your thoughts on what do we do? Where do we go from here with that information?
Watchmen is based off of it originally started as a graphic novel in the 80s by Alan Moore, and it was a superhero kind of mystery, and it kind of followed the life. And there was a movie a few years back, and then in 2019 they did the series, which was like a sequel to the graphic novel and the movie, and it contained a significant part of Tulsa. Tulsa was the main setting for it. And it opened actually with the Tulsa Race Massacre. So right into the show, as the show opened up, there was a young man in a theater watching a movie with Bass Reeves, the inspiration for the Lone Ranger. And as he comes out the theater, there are white people burning the stores, they're shooting at Black people, and so it was.
This is in the graphic novel, or this is what actually happened?
This is an actual show, and it showed a dramatization of what happened in Tulsa.
Okay.
So the original concept of Watchmen was a graphic novel, but this was a TV show that was like a sequel to that.
Okay.
Regina King.
So go back to it and let's describe what happened in Tulsa. Somebody might not know. Tell about what actually happened. This is the anniversary, you're saying?
Yes. So in Tulsa, the incident starts with a young man named Dick Rowland, who was a shoe shiner. He went into an elevator at the Drexel building. He's a black man, I think around 19. His boss had made it so that they could use the colored restroom on the top of the Drexel building. He goes into the elevator. Sarah Page is a white woman who operates the elevator. She's, I believe, 17. There's a lot of different interpretations what happened, but the majority of people believe that he tripped going into the elevator, grabbed her arm to stop himself from falling. She screamed. He ran out. A white store clerk came in and did not witness the incident, but reported the incident as him trying to go ahead and assault Sarah Page. When she talked to the police, she denied that. She talked about, just what had happened and didn't want to press any charges. And there's thoughts that they knew each other. What that then blew up into was the largest race riot and massacre. It started with them arresting him and then having to move him from the jail to the courthouse to have a more secure location. Black members of the community coming out to protect him because the newspaper was fanning the flames of the hatred, the anger, the jealousy that existed. Down in that area, it's called Black Wall Street. You had African-American millionaires. You had people who had shops, stores, businesses, and there were white communities, members of the white community that were very jealous of that were very angry that Black people were successful in that area. And this became an excuse and a powder to Craig to go ahead and start this massacre. It was the first time bombs were dropped on American soil. By
the U.S. government, right?
The Ku Klux Klan, and which included members of the U.S. government. Mm-hmm. There were police that were involved in this that were going ahead.
Hold up. My understanding was that there were actually aerial bombing of the Black community. I understood it was by our government. Am I wrong in that, or was it private people doing bombing from airplanes?
My understanding was that it was the KKK. Okay. And I don't know if anybody else has anything on that. I know they were coming down from airplanes. Okay. But what then happened was they basically they looted the Black stores, they destroyed them. They went ahead, it was, I think, 35 square blocks. They rounded up all of the Black people and incarcerated them for their protection, apparently, or getting them out the way. So you had about 6,000 people who were in some of their makeshift jails in terms of the hall and one of the yard. I'm blanking on the fairgrounds. But the amount of damage was, in today's dollars, about 32 million in personal and property damage. They had, I think it was over 10,000 people left homeless from that. Um, People lost, jobs and homes, and as many as 300 people died, and I think 800 were injured. So it was a 24-hour thing. It went from May 31st to June 1st, and then it quietly just shut down. And what happened is it got covered up over time. So it wasn't initially added to history books. It was passed over and covered over historically and wasn't talked about in, anniversaries of the state and anniversaries of the city, until they came out with a commission in 2001, did a commission to review the details of the event, so that they could look into what actually happened, and go ahead and address that. And recently, they have been making some potential progress in discovering mass graves. So one of the things that is hard is to tell how many people were actually killed because they couldn't find the bodies. They were looking in some of the cemeteries and have some pieces of radar that they're using, and I think they've discovered potentially some of the mass graves that'll give a better account of how many people actually died and what happened. And now that we have DNA, there's going to be some potential to do that with descendants being able to connect back.
Irma McLaurin, let me have you take it from there. You published or printed, we published an article that you wrote in Insight News entitled American-Made Black Race Pogrom, White Erasure of Black Tulsa. I'm sharing that. The headline is there, and I'll scroll down into the image that shows the massive devastation of the Black community and the lead into the story. But Irma, talk about this story and build on the story that Jonathan began.
Well, first I want to say that I called it a pogrom, which according to the dictionary is, quote, an organized massacre of a particular ethnic group, in particular that of Jews in Russia or Eastern Europe. What needs to be added to that is Black Americans, okay? The term, it comes from the Russian word gromit, which literally means devastation, destroyed by the use of violence. So I was very intentional in using that because we want to call things riots and we want to talk about this, but we never really designate them as what they are, which is that this was an organized massacre, of Black people. And it is not the first time that Black Wall Streets across the country, including North Carolina and Durham, where I have been, in Tampa, Florida, and I think we can start naming other places where the jealousy and the white rage of white people is such that they actually want to destroy us. And any excuse will do, an accident, a misunderstanding, a misword. And so there is evidence that this was an accident, the young woman herself, but people use that as an excuse to then perpetrate this incredible violence, which is really a continuation of the violence under slavery. We have to understand, and I think it was mentioned, that the first police force is really an extension of vigilantism, what we used to call paddy rollers, whose job was to patrol the slaves. And police forces today are really just a modern day version of that, which while they capture white people, their main purpose is to control Black and brown Black bodies initially, and then Black and brown bodies. And I think, you asked everyone to talk about what was on the top of their mind. Mm-hmm. What is on the top of my mind is the sheer violence in this country. I just came back from Paris. I was in South Africa. I was in Zimbabwe. And I am just struck by how much violence in just less. I haven't even been back a month. And we've had 3 different events. Today was another event when someone didn't like the fact that they still had pain after an operation and go into a hospital and murder the doctor who operated on them and anybody else who got in his way. This country is founded on violence. And until it comes to terms with that, we are going to be stuck with these continuations. Racial violence is at the top of the list. White people feel threatened by our demands for inclusion and the fact that we have actually prepared ourselves to be included. We have educated ourselves. We have conducted ourselves as voters and citizens in a way where we have to be included. They can't ignore us anymore. And this whole idea of replacement theory is just a simple, stupid excuse to perpetrate further violence, whether it's structural, political, and then really physical violence.
Kamau King, jump in. What are your thoughts?
I'm thinking, I read an article today about the ambassador to Luxembourg under Trump. And when he got to Luxembourg, he was interviewing different groups. And when he interviewed the Jewish community, he asked them, well, what's on your mind? What can I do for you? And they said that, Luxembourg had never did any research with regard to what the country had taken from them during World War II, during the Holocaust. And so, and this was like in 2017, it's fairly recent. So this ambassador, and I have the article, it's in the newspaper, I don't remember his name. He started pushing for Luxembourg to do some research and to find out, what, like the banks were holding millions of dollars that Jews had put into the system and had never been given back to them. And so I don't think that there's ever been any reparations for what happened in Tulsa. And I know that there haven't been reparations for, just for slavery. And I know it would be a huge fight, but I think that it's something it's got to be pushed. And I'm sure there are people who are pushing it, but I don't know where it is. I don't know where it stands. But the kind of stuff that Jonathan talked about in Tulsa, and it's happening daily. The other thing that's on my mind is that I think that there's a way to come up with sensible gun control that also protects people's, if they want to have guns, if people have guns, they already have guns, that protects people's rights to have guns, not weapons of mass destruction like the AR-15, but I think there is a way to do that. But I believe that the politicians are really afraid because they'll get what they're calling now primaried if they put forth any legislation with regard to gun control. So those are the kind of things on my mind: reparations and some kind of sensible way to have gun control in the United States.
Angela, good afternoon. How are you? Good to see you.
Hello, good afternoon. Happy to be here.
What's on your mind? Respond to what we've talked about or bring something new.
No, I think that it's really unfortunate, the world that we're living in today, where the constant attack on people of color, particularly Black folk, is just an onslaught. It's never ending. It's every day. And, in a moment of when we should be celebrating and getting excited for Juneteenth, for Pride Month, we are constantly reminded that we're under attack. And how can we further build systems to protect our community right now is a lot of what I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about how can we as a Black community come together to protect our own physically, but also our future when it comes to economic opportunities, to our education and to our wealth and to these more economic, metaphysical questions, our spirit, all of those things too. I'm thinking about that. And so that's what I've been thinking about.
Brenda, go ahead.
Let me say, last week I made a statement that I see that the country is spiraling downward. And I've been thinking about that. And I started going to my library to start pulling down books because I really want to start writing something on the type of things that Angela's saying, but they're so broad. It's spiritual, it's metaphysical, it's what's in your face right now. So I hear you, Angela. It's a broad subject matter, but I believe that when we write things down, logic has to follow. For me, it does anyway. I can say things and maybe it don't make sense, but once I write them down, I can catch the inconsistencies. So that's where I am. I'm beginning to think about writing.
Brenda, you're doing a lot of writing. You're doing writing. What are you thinking? What's on your mind today?
It's just hard to talk about it. I ran across an article this morning about Italy and that they have a gun culture in Italy, but no mass shootings. So I haven't had a chance to read it, but it was in Reader's Digest, and it just said Italy has a gun culture, and it was just really lined up of who could have guns. I'm going to go back and really look at that because I'm sorry. I feel that the Uvalde, is that how you pronounce it? Those are brown children. Mm-hmm. And I keep saying, God, this could not have been purposely done. But it looks so obvious to me, when that mother went in and defied the police and got her children, it just said so much. And she was so articulate this morning in saying the guns just kept going off. She said 45 minutes and there was no police officer in the hallway. It just made no sense to me. And, I was telling one of my students, he wanted me to ask, because believe it or not, Legal Thursday is really popular, and it's popular for millennials. And they send questions all the time. And Kamau, this was one question that a student asked today. What is it that we can do to get rid of the filibuster? Because I don't know if this is about voting, if this is about them getting in on the primaries, or if they are just adamant in the fact, like Rick Scott, I'm not giving up my Second Amendment rights. So they're saying, well, can we vote them out?
Yeah, 51 votes gets rid of the filibuster.
But how can what is it that we can do to get those 10 votes from Republicans?
You don't need 10. If you get rid of the filibuster, all you need is 51.
But you need 10 Republicans, right?
Not to get rid of the filibuster. That wasn't your question. You said, what does it take to get rid of the filibuster? Which the filibuster makes it so that you have to have 60 votes to pass legislation. That's the filibuster, that it takes 60. But
10 of the 60 have to come from Republicans.
No.
Oh, okay. No. Okay.
You're talking about two different issues that are both related by the filibuster. What Kamau has just said is, in order to get rid of that process itself, the filibuster, you just need 50 plus 1. But in order to go ahead and override a filibuster that's in process is where you need the 60 votes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
The Republicans got rid of the filibuster. They got rid of the filibuster under I think it was under Trump. Yeah. And they went in and they just, we're through with this. And so it took majority vote, majority rules. You know, that's how they got these Supreme Court justices through. Yeah. But now, even though you have 50 Democrats who are calling themselves Democrats, you have a couple who are kind of shaky. That guy from West Virginia, and I think it's a lady from
Arizona.
You know, they can't trust them to hold the party line.
Well, it's pretty upsetting. I don't know, and to hear the kids say, I don't want to go back to school. I'm scared to go back to school. So I'm saying, how do we help them? I'm frustrated. I'm sorry. It's
you in that long line.
Huh?
You in that long line.
I know. Yeah. I'm worried about the babies.
Yeah.
And it's
I
a
don't know,
long
from
summer.
your researchers and anthropologist point of view, you know, nothing that we're saying or doing or seeing is new. And I think you kind of opened with this has been a pattern in practice in our country and in the West over a long period of time. And so my question remains, where do we go? How do we organize some intentionality? And maybe we have all along, which is why we can say there is progress, but it also means that we've got so much more to do to arrive at a situation where all of us, every human being can genuinely say, I feel that I'm in a space where I can be fulfilled, where I can be on a perpetual movement towards self-realization, that there are no structural barriers to my development as a human being. We're not there, but I think we're going there. What do you think, Dr. Irma?
You know, one of the things that I tell my students often when I was teaching is that culture is not logical. And so we want to lay out a pattern that says, well, if we say this or do this, then people will automatically follow because it's a logical path. But culture is not logical. You know, we do a lot of things that are maladaptive behaviors that will harm us simply because it's cultural. We have a culture of violence and guns in this country. And the majority of people who own those guns are white. And so this is really the decision that white people have to make, you know, about how to dismantle that culture. And some of it is going up and lobbying to make sure they don't vote in politicians who support gun control, who support guns. It means them protesting and getting in the streets. I mean, like some of the Sandy Hooks people did. How is it that we could forget about Sandy Hooks, right? It also means that we have to continuously put the pressure on police departments because the response from Sandy Hooks to the response of what happened in Texas is radically different. And even after all that we've learned about George Floyd and all that we've learned about police needing to be more mindful, they hesitated and waited for over an hour because it wasn't their children.
Right.
It wasn't their children. And so I think it would have been a different response, people putting their lives on the line, had it been children who look like their own.
That's
And
what
so
I said. They were brown children.
We still have a racialized divide in this country around even how we respond to violence, not only who gets to perpetrate violence. And the first thing they do is invoke the fact that this person had a mental illness. We don't do that when the criminal, the perpetrator, is Black, but immediately they start going to the mental health. But we have to think about the fact there has never been a profiling, you know, there's never really been a profiling of of white perpetrators. And we've had, you know, violence that is just unheard of. And yet there's never been a real profile of the kind of people who do that. Every gun shooting, with maybe one exception, has been done by a white youth or someone white, you know, who is not over the age of 50. How is that possible without us having some kind of understanding of how do you anticipate or stop that, you know?
Jonathan, what do you think? How is it possible?
Was it me or was it Kamau?
Jonathan.
Oh, okay. I agree with Dr. Irma. I mean, this is woven into our DNA in the country. It's woven into what being America is about. And in fact, what's fascinating about this is, again, I'm going to go back to the misinterpretation of the Second Amendment that has been thought to be about your right to own a gun as an individual, when no, it was really about being an armed militia to put down slave rebellions. And it has gotten so twisted around that the moment you start challenging these ideas, the moment you start criticizing the interpretation or the amount of guns or the level of firepower, it becomes you're criticizing America.
Right.
And you hate America and you're trying to restrict somebody's freedom. And there's not a stop to think about, where does your freedom stop when it's about killing or putting people's lives in danger? I don't care that people own guns. I've got friends who are gun owners who have guns that they like. They have some that are specialty guns, but they're responsible gun owners. They lock theirs up. They train people to utilize them. That's the piece that gets covered over in this. And that's actually what the NRA used to do. It used to actually do gun training and used to be about how to responsibly handle a gun. Now what it's about is how many guns you can have, how many you can purchase and use. And there was a piece this morning about how I think it's over 100 campaigns this year feature guns. People going on, vote for me, and then they're shooting guns and showing how powerful they are and how much they stand up for gun rights, which again isn't a thing. And so we've got to change the narrative, and we've got to change the understanding in this country. And the fact that we are sitting here waiting for information instead of that police chief already being under indictment, instead of the investigation being completed right now of what happened. There's no excuse for what went down, and there's no excuse for all that time, but the answers are not coming. They've been changing the story, and it seems to cover their backsides, because first he had body armor on, then he didn't. Then it turns out he didn't have armor. He was barricaded in the room. Well, no, it turns out he was just locked in the room. And they waited for the keys from the janitor in order to open the room. You've never seen them go to an active shooter and wait for keys.
Yep.
They smashed the door and they got a battering ram. The time they took for this, it all looks really, really strange and suspicious why they took so long.
Especially after we just had, a whole conversation in Minneapolis around waiting 20 seconds to enter a home after a knock and announce, right? So, Mr. King, the city of Minneapolis just banned no knock warrants, but they have permitted knock and announce, a knock and entries. So basically you knock, and if it's during the day, you have to wait 20 seconds. And if it's during the night, you wait 30 seconds. And then you can enter someone's home after you've announced your presence. But you knock first, right? And so, there was a whole battle about this, these 20 seconds, 30 seconds of, is this enough time for someone to respond? Is this enough time for somebody to acknowledge that there are police at the door, things like that? Whereas they waited an infinite, it was literally lives were at risk. Lives were at risk, and they waited, and they were waiting for a key before they could even enter the premises. And that's absolutely ridiculous. And it just goes to show, when things are polarized, when these political discussions are polarized, how the tricks and the schematics and the schemes come up, and they're now important, right? Now 20 seconds, 10 seconds, between 20 seconds and 30 seconds are important. Whereas, you know, waiting as who knows how long when there's lives on the line is not. So that's something that I want to call out, because we know that they're politics, they're tricks. This is the issue with, even when you're talking about what Jonathan said earlier, gun rights in this country. A lot of the conversation is not based in policy. It's not based in actually what is the statute and what is the law. It is based in, you know, some verbal semantics and gotchas and one-liners on Fox News. You know, it's not based in what is actually there printed. And that's one of the things that gets me the most angry, because yes, people are afraid, and our community particularly is afraid, so much so that in the last year, gun ownership rates have skyrocketed in our community, right? And yet, what we have always wanted was just to be safe. And how can we get that? And so folks have now, they feel like the police have failed them, the government has failed them, so they have to rely on themselves, and they're going to do it with their AK-47s, right? And so that is not a testament to the strength of our democracy. You know, Jonathan said also something earlier about how if you criticize gun rights, you're criticizing America. Maybe we should, right? Maybe the fundamental part of democracy is criticism and also coalescence after that. You criticize, you acknowledge a problem, and then you work towards a solution. And yet we're always in this point, this stunted point where we constantly are criticizing, and then we're not acknowledging the problem. That the other side isn't acknowledging or hearing us that we're saying that there's a problem, right? And so we can't get to that solution because we're always in this stunted space of just arguing our reality and our existence.
I heard a radio segment right before I came on today. The fellow from CDC was talking about the study gun violence, a lot of issues around guns. You know, that they had the Congress had forbid that they had stopped the study. You couldn't even study gun violence. You know, who was getting hurt, whether having guns help, not having guns hurt. You know, so the Congress stopped that. But 2 years ago, they resumed it. And he gave the example of how the United States government put $200 million in the study of automobile deaths over a 20-year period. And he said that as a result of the studies over the 20-year period, we now have safer cars. The rate of deaths on highways has gone way down, even though there are more people, faster cars, and blah, blah, blah. But with regard to guns, he says CDC knows that the more guns in America, the more deaths. You know, but they have been stunted from really studying this. He's hoping that as a result of them now being able to study, that they can point politicians in the proper direction. That if you, like Kemp, if you pass a permitless carry, like here in Georgia, you don't even have to have a permit anymore to carry a gun. You just, everybody can carry it openly. It's Dodge City, you know. So he's, what this guy from CDC is saying is that that's going to result in more deaths, and they can show that. So I'm hoping that as the CDC, and I think her name is Walensky, the head of CDC now, I think as they begin to study and get the facts, maybe they'll be able to put facts in the face of these people who just want to sell guns. And I think the manufacturers, those are the ones who are controlling the NRA right now. The people who are making the guns, they don't want any restrictions on it. So I'm hoping that as they begin to study gun violence and what works and what doesn't work, that we can come to some type of logical conclusion as to how you can restrain it.
Angela, you mentioned a few shows ago the question, the notion of patriarchy, I believe. And I want to take this conversation there. I'm reading a book called Patriarchy Blues. I just opened it up this morning. The author is Frederick Joseph, and he's a New York Times bestselling author. His book was called The Black Friend, and he's a marketing professional, celebrated. And so the question becomes, is the solution not at the level we're talking about now? What can happen in policy? What can happen in practices around control and ownership of guns and their use? What can happen in terms of understanding mental health challenges where people either given or goaded or some way find themselves in situations that they become perpetrators of mass violence? Is there something that society is considering, must consider about the arrangement? And the arrangement I'm talking about is the patriarchy. And is there a relationship between patriarchy and violence in the way we look at the world? So Angela and Irma and Brenda, you guys take off on that. And where do we go? What does it mean?
Oh, yes. I'm going to just say this. You don't have to spend more than a day in a feminist studies, queer studies course, right, to learn that the patriarchy and the heteropatriarchy fulfills and they perpetuate this thing called toxic masculinity. And a part of toxic masculinity that we've seen historically is this itching for violence, right? To conquer, it's the same in the colonialist, capitalist mindset. Let me exploit and conquer first. And that is deeply rooted in the patriarchal hegemony that we live in our society, where that dictates to be even a man or to be even powerful, seen as powerful, you have to have a violent, the potential for violence and the realization of violence when that power is usurped. And so, that is one of the things that the patriarchy and the society that we live in now continues to perpetuate. And I see this white violence on Black and brown communities as a continuance of it, because when we are in our mind, basically socialized to believe that power equals what you can violently do to somebody else. When you feel that your power, your place in this country, your place in society is being usurped, you will then violently backlash. And we've seen this multiple times with even thinking about like our own Black history of freeman towns. Not a lot of folk know about freeman towns or like the Black bourgeoisie of the 19th century, things like that. But essentially, when there would be a wealthy Black doctor, wealthy Black landowner during Jim Crow, what would happen other than a white mob would show up and take their spot, right? And a white mob would lynch them, right? A lot of the lynchings, that happened to folks who are doing well for themselves. And so that's one of those things where the societal paradigm that we live in is being sustained by patriarchal violence, right? And we have to acknowledge that, because we also have to acknowledge that then fighting against patriarchal violence means also acknowledging marginalized genders like women, like trans folk, like non-binary folk, and actually elevating them to a status of power in our society, no matter how scary that might be, and protecting them from the violence that they face. And protecting communities of color from white violence. That then is the definition of fighting against the patriarchy and usurping and changing the societal dynamics that we have. We cannot stand by and see particularly Black women, Black children, Black trans folk. We cannot stand by and be silent while they are faced with violence. And they're actually, Black trans women today face the highest forms of violence in the country currently. And that is a crucial part of our society right now, because that is our society trying to protect the patriarchal hegemony that we live in. Well, we have to protect them. And protecting them is also protecting us and protecting our future.
Dr. Irma, go ahead.
I cannot believe that 5 years ago, I wrote a piece for Ms. Magazine. This was in response to the Me Too movement, called "We Must Shatter Silence and Shift Our Sexist Culture." And I want to speak because I think Angela has hit it on the nose. Like racism, sexual harassment is based on socially engineered ideas, not biological facts, including notions that women are the quote unquote weaker sex, that women are intellectually inferior to men, and that it is, quote, divine role of men to rule over women, especially sexually. These beliefs are so deeply ingrained in our society that boys grow up unaware of the toxic social ideas they have absorbed, which position women in subordinates to them with less value and power. And so I want to say two things. One, I am the mother of a son, a daughter, and the auntie of a trans person. And so I take this very personally. We need a new definition of masculinity for Black men, because when we talk about the kind of masculinity that Black men want to find themselves in, if all they're doing is replicating white patriarchy, we're in serious trouble. Right. And we've already gone down that rabbit hole. We're in it, and we need to take a different direction. Because if all we're talking about doing, when we talk about the need for us to support Black men and Black masculinity, heteronormative, whatever it is, if all we're doing is replicating the existing culture, we're problematic. And while we talk about, what is happening with trans femme people, we don't talk about trans men, people who are biologically born female who decide to become trans men. And then what kind of behavior and social identity do they develop? And is it only in terms of just, manifesting or adopting what is already in existence, or is it something new? Because I also work on domestic violence. We have domestic violence among LGBTQ communities that in many ways, despite the fact that it may be same-sex partners, they replicate the kind of patriarchal violence that in fact their very identities are supposed to be negating.
Mm-hmm.
So there's some fundamental contradictions. And so my question is, for men and women, for people who are the parents of children, how are you raising your children? Mm-hmm. How are you raising your children? Because that's where the difference is going to be.
Mm-hmm. Brenda, jump in.
I think it's the radicalization of a person like Ramos that came in, who had been, he wrote, Jonathan, how many pages was the manifesto? I think you had mentioned that.
I did not mention the.
Someone had mentioned the manifesto.
Pages.
I think it was posted 2 days before he went into that school. And, it goes back to what Dr. Irma said. What are we doing, or what are they doing in raising their children? How do they explain the differences? Why is it so difficult to understand that we're all people? Someone said it's not a melting pot. I forgot how they described it, but I am really, really struggling with this. I really have to admit, in Kansas City, we were on the front line. We were protesting. We were in the streets. We weren't worried about someone coming in and just spraying bullets. We were expressing our democratic right to say the things that were happening in our communities was not right. So I want to vote them all out, and Ted Cruz would be at the front of the line. So that means it goes back to Angela and what Dr. Irma said. We've got to find another direction. And I remember months ago when Dr. Irma said, we need to be writing articles, we need to be speaking, and we just need to let people know that we can't take this anymore. And I'm telling you, those parents in Texas are not going to be quiet. They might be field workers and however they want to describe the parents in that small town, but they know that they took their children away from them. They didn't give those kids a chance. They were texting, "We need help," and no one came.
And no one came.
Yeah,
and so
not
who?
just texting, 911 calls.
All in closets, in
Wow.
bathrooms.
And I think we need to be supporting them as well.
Yes.
And making sure, but I want to advocate us not just diagnosing that there is a problem, but I think we need to get back to the community schools. I think Insight News needs to start Saturday schools where we're educating our children, because in the absence of kids getting content in schools, where the hell are they going to get it from? Where are they going to get this knowledge? So if nothing else, showing them how to read the newspaper, where they can look for alternative sources of information so that they're not just passive recipients of whatever's put out there, but they become critical thinkers. I remember I'm listening to people talking about in their family when Black folks, only one person could read, and people would sit around the dinner table and read the newspaper or listen to the radio. I'm thinking of the Black Panther schools that they used to have. I'm thinking about the schools at like UMass New Africa House, where they had Saturday schools. I'm thinking about the Jewish schools. My father worked at a synagogue for 30 years. I'm thinking about, the Jewish schools. I'm thinking about the Chinese schools where kids go to learn about their culture. We need to institute those, because we cannot depend upon public education or charter schools, which are nothing more to me than some kind of form of policing Black and brown bodies. We can't depend on them to teach our children to be critical thinkers, critical writers, and critical citizens who do not just absorb what's put out there.
I absolutely agree. And I would say that I read Bell Hooks. Bell Hooks is a very great author. She has 2 books, The Will to Change, on masculinity and love. And then also she has a number of books, but All About Love is another one that I recommend. And I also say the kids are on TikTok. They're not on Facebook. So sometimes it means meeting them where they are at, but there's a lot of youth who are hungry for this just type of conversation. I have to go, but it was such a pleasure to be here with you all, and I'll see you all next week. Hopefully.
You said Bell Hooks on masculinity?
Yes, the will.
And also, go ahead.
So Jonathan and Kamau, let's end with you guys talking about what is the pathway to examine, to discuss, and to address the question of toxic masculinity.
I think we have to go on TikTok and meet them. There's a young Black man from Chicago who is teaching Black history on TikTok. So Insight News needs to hire a social media person who can take the content, because you've got great content, and also this translated into the form where children who are looking at these mediums can have access to them, because they're not doing Facebook anymore. They're barely doing Instagram. They're now on TikTok, And so maybe, we had talked about these workshops of showing them how to be cultivators, of content. I think this is to let them know that when legislatures are passing laws that say what teachers can and cannot teach in school, Black folks have always had an alternative medium. And Black newspapers were there, but Black newspapers have to move into the 21st and 22nd century in terms of the platforms that they're using to disseminate that content, right? Because once you hook them in that there's something relevant, they'll go and read the newspapers, but you got to get them hooked in first. Right.
Great comment. Jonathan, Kamau?
I totally agree with that. I want to go back to the toxic masculinity piece, because I think that starts with us. I think it starts with men, especially white men, but all men. We have to go ahead and recognize that that is a sickness within our community, within our gender, that we have to, those that are still in that space have to unlearn what our society has bombarded us with. I mean, when you were growing up, you take in the 50s and the 60s, the man was the guy who went out and he had the job, and the wife just stayed at home and she was dainty and delicate. And even as you got into the 70s and 80s, there was more of women coming into the workplace and doing more, even though they had been doing it all over time. You look back at Hallie Quinn Brown, Ida B. Wells, Katherine Johnson, they're all there, but we don't highlight them enough. But there's a point here where men have to take responsibility for that. They have to go ahead and pass down to young men coming up and stop the toxic masculinity, stop the practices that are there, and focus in on the understanding of, I think, as you said, a new kind of masculinity. Masculinity isn't about being tough, but it is about being strong. Strong enough to apologize when you're wrong, strong enough to take responsibility for your actions, strong enough to go ahead and recognize when people think differently than you, it's okay. And you don't have to resort to violence, and you don't have to resort to hate around that, but rather look at a way that can bring you and whoever you're talking with together, even if it's to just say, we're going to have to agree to disagree. And that it stops there.
And I think we have to, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and then Cal first, and then Dr. Irma.
Yeah, I've grown over the years with regard to masculinity and homosexuality as a result of my interactions with people. I realized that a couple of my best professors were homosexuals. I couldn't have got into Howard University without a homosexual helping me get there. Dr. Smithy at UMKC.
And Jeremiah Cameron.
Yeah, Jeremiah Cameron. And these just treat people the way you want to be treated. I think that without me getting into the mental and physical stuff, treat people the way I want to be treated. And try to love them. Try to love everyone if you can.
And I think,
Irma, let me have you close this out, but I'll throw this out for you to respond to as well. Are there competing systems? One that emphasizes and rewards violence as the shortcut to power and maintenance of power and utilization of power for the sake of power, versus a system that is based on balance and justice, that forgoes violence for the long-term, slow, hard work of reasoning and of sharing and of ensuring that people have access to knowledge that is unending, that treats the home like a school and treats school like home, so that the process of development never ends. What do you think, Dr. Irma?
That's a big one. I'm going to answer the last question first. I think that's what we aspire to. We're not there yet. I think what you described in terms of the culture of violence that we have, and one that's about power and power over, not power to, but power over, is what this country is predicated upon. It's what we promote. It's what we value. It's what we reward people for, right? And as Frederick Douglass once said, power concedes nothing, right? Without a fight. It never has and it never will, right? But what I also want to say is, and I think we've said it in lots of different ways, is that we have to stop promoting masculinity, femininity, and start promoting personhood. That we need to be thinking about people in terms of personhood, because the binary is no longer that works. And I coach people, and I deal with so many people who have trauma over the ways in which their families have has disrespected them, have distanced them, have in some ways excluded them. So they're not only dealing with the exclusion of their racialized identity, they're dealing with the exclusion by their own families and communities of what their sexual orientation is. And that should not be the case. If it's a good person, it's a good person.
Yeah.
Regardless of how they present to the world. And since I have this range in my family, I can't afford to be dealing in absolute binaries that people are either this or that.
Yeah.
So I think the question is, how do we get back? And I think we have to do it as subcultures, because I don't think we can depend on the dominant heteronormative culture to do it for us. How do we begin to create a sense of collective identity again, of community, of a respect for personhood?
Thank you.
As opposed to where we are now, where our kids are so into radical individualism. Everybody wants to be a radical individual. They want to be different. They want to be recognized on social media. And so people put all this energy. And what social media is saying is that the people who are famous on TikTok and Instagram, the Black, Indigenous, and people of color, they're exhausted, because to produce that kind of an identity that is a public persona takes a lot. And now they're having to go to therapy to figure out how to deal with it.
Let me say this, Alvin. I have an uncle, and he's, bless his soul, but my cousin was a homosexual. And so they outed him. I mean, they just put him, when I say out, they just, talk bad, horrible. And when Gary passed away, man, they just all fell on their knees, because they knew they loved Gary. But because of this cultural construct that says, he's a homosexual, you're not supposed to like him, he ain't a man, blah, blah, blah. But what I saw is that love came out, but it came out too late.
Yeah.
Other issue with women just came up this last night in my men's study group, discipleship group, is whether or not we're going to ordain women to be deacons. And to my that's a no-brainer. I said, the women do the work. That's who you want to be your deacon. So, but we're gonna fight those kind of things. But yeah, it's just a matter of accept people, and not only through sexual things, but I began to do that racially. I speak. And if the guys don't speak back, I speak again. If they don't speak back the second time, then I know, hey, they don't want interaction. But I try to meet people as an individual and let them see who I am and see who they are.
And the bottom line, I think, with all of this, I agree with everything that people are saying. Even if you're having a problem understanding what non-binary means or orientation, as Black people, with everything that we have been through, to turn to any other group and visit on them the same kind of hate and the same kind of marginalization or oppression we have held, it's crazy and it's wrong. So if you can't get past those ideas, remember just that piece, that you shouldn't be treating anybody any different than you would want to be treated, and that you would hope that your own group deserves to be treated.
Right.
And that's
to understand we wouldn't have gotten where we were without some good ones.
Bayard Rustin.
I think there's authors saying that exactly, Jonathan, that perhaps we have to be intentional about going to the place of the greatest damage, the greatest harm, and seeking and placing healing there first. And in this book, I think he's saying that's where Black trans men and Black trans women live, that who are most victimized, or Black trans women, I think. I haven't finished reading this, but that's where we have to pay special attention. And from that point, continue to elevate healing in us and for us throughout the culture and throughout the world. Kamau, you're reading a book. What are you going to show us? You have something else?
I went to Eric Holder's. He just finished his book. Yeah, Our Unfinished March.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. He signed it. He's on a tour now. But it's about the violent past and imperiled future of the vote. It's about the vote and how it's interesting. At the Constitutional Convention when they were saying let everybody vote, he said even the stupid ones we don't want the stupid ones to vote. And then white men couldn't vote, and they had to fight to vote. So the vote has been really an issue throughout America. Who gets to vote? And that's what this book is about.
Brenda Johnson, anything you're reading?
That I am reading, and I don't have it to show, but this is Pride Month, and my play niece Sawyer May just had her birthday, and her two moms are very awesome. And so I got The Night Before Pride. It's a new book that comes out, and it talks about the night before Pride and getting ready for Pride and the Pride celebration. So that's what I'm reading.
Brenda? Anything, Brenda, that you're reading new?
Doing more exploration on the colored soldiers from the Civil War. And I just didn't realize that the 10,000 or later 100,000 pretty much saved Abe Lincoln and the country.
Oh, yeah.
And it wasn't until Lee Jordan, Al was interviewing him, the Midwest regional and state representative for Juneteenth coming up. And that's really gotten me going because, and I'm going to do more exploration on it. These guys were tough, and it was, again, Dr. Irma and I talk about our students because I learned so much from them. And this one guy said, and he was one of my white students, and he said, those guys had to be tough. They are, they've been a slave, but they've picked up their gun, they've picked up the United States flag, and they're saying, we're going to fight for other people's freedom, although we just got ours back. They had to be awfully tough, spiritually and personally, because that was the question. How could they be so tough and so committed to this country after everything the country has done to them, and said, we've got to get out here and fight? How many knew that if they had not come in, wouldn't have been a country?
Yeah.
I wanted to save the last for Dr. Irma, and I'm going to put this share on the screen. Irma, you can talk about this. I don't know. Are you?
And great article.
Thank
Are you seeing that, Irma?
Yes.
Okay. So talk about that and whatever else you're reading, but talk about this piece in particular, if you would.
Well, this was written by a young man who attended the talk that I gave at the WITS Center for Diversity in Johannesburg, and he also is an intern. He himself is cisgender, but he's an intern at the Gala Archive, which is an archive for it's the Gala Gay Archive that is in the university. And so he was at the talk that I gave and was so inspired that he wrote this essay, and I sent it to Al and said, hey, I think this needs to be published. So I'm honored that my words and my presentation inspired someone in such a way that he took the time to actually write about what it made him think about. And so that was a great opportunity. And I'm in touch with the people who I actually want to write something about the archive that they've started there, because not only is it an archive, but it's also a museum, but it also has collected the materials from a lot of Black LGBTQ people who often themselves are actually put on the sidelines by the white LGBTQ community, So they're dealing with this racialization and stuff, but I was inspired by them. I want to write something about them. And what I'm reading, I think you can see it, is called Our Separate Ways. I want to do a review of it. It came out about, it's called Our Separate Ways. And it's a book by Ella Bell Smith, who is at Dartmouth, a professor, Stella Nkomo, who's a Black American married to a South African who lives in South Africa now. She was the first Black woman to get a PhD in business from the University of Massachusetts Amherst. And I know them from my time spent there. And it's about Black and white women in the struggle for professional identity. And while it was written almost a decade ago, published, they brought it up to date with a new introduction to say, has anything changed since we wrote this book? And in effect, it says not much. I hope to have another book for you next week, because in a couple of hours, I'm going to see Valerie Jarrett. I am here in Charlotte, North Carolina. And part of the event is that, if you do the VIP, you get a copy of her signed memoir. So I'll be getting my copy.
We'll give her our best. Listen, thank you all. This has been a rich and wonderful conversation. We'll see you next week. Take care. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Thank you.
Take care.
Take
Bye.
care, yeah.